Hi, I'm Marcos, and on this episode of Coming to the Faith podcast, I sit down with Lorraine Felix. She's a mother, she's a worshiper, she's a wife, ultimately, daughter of a king. A story of her journey through encountering God, hitting a bump in the road, but ultimately leading to redemption. Enjoy the episode. Lorraine, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How's the day treating you
Good.
as we sit here and record this episode?
Good, good. Can't wait for the warm weather to come back again. It was a little tease a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I get that. No, I get that.
Yeah. Thankful no allergies, though. Usually get allergies, so.
That's good. That's good. This time of year, it's like, we go extreme freezing to now, spring, summer.
I know.
But hey, East Coast, it is what it is.
That's right.
So, but thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I look forward to having this sit down with you. And I got to ask you, like I ask all the guests, who is Lorraine Felix?
So, I think we were sharing a little bit before. I guess in a general sense, Lorraine is someone who, as a daughter of the King, right? I love the Lord. I love people. Love getting to know people, hearing their story, but in a more personal sense. I'm a wife, pastor's wife, that is, and we all to Pastor Bernie. I'm a mom to three amazing, I want to say children, but now I have to say young adults.
They'll always be your kids.
They'll always be my babies. Yeah. I'm sorry. But they are young adults. Gio, 29, which I cannot believe. Soraya, 22. Isabella, 19. I'm also a caretaker to my mom. She's, in her 80s now. Yeah. Doing great, but it's that season of my life where kind of exiting one, but entering another. And professionally, I'm a paralegal, legal assistant. I've been in the legal industry for since I was 19. Wow. I've always loved that. The law has always fascinated me, and serving people, public service and all that. So really enjoyed that. But then there's also a side of me that's creative as well. So there's always been that interesting tension between the analytical and then the creative. There was a point in my life where, I didn't understand that, but now I do. I could see how it fits. So I love teaching. In the local church specifically, I do teach the word, and I'm a worship leader as well. So I can see how those two things match or complement, I should say. And that's where that comes in. But yeah, that's just kind of in a nutshell, who I am.
Yeah, and thank you for that. Mm-hmm. I have to say that as someone I've gotten to know you over the years, and I've seen some of the things you described, and you do juggle different hats. You are a wife, you are a mother, you're a worship leader, you're a teacher. I've seen you in the place of employment. You've helped yours truly. So
that's right.
I've seen that dynamic. Yeah. So I've seen the different facets of who Lorraine is and all that she does and is a part of. You have kind of have like a tentacle in every pole as it was.
And if I can add in real quick, I had just seen literally not too long ago. When I was young, I used to diary a lot. I was a diary girl. And still to this day, I love to journal and all that stuff. And in one of my entries, I had forgotten about this. I had said, when I grow up, I want to be either a lawyer, crazy interesting, right? Because I didn't plan to be in the legal field because I was young. I was maybe 8 when I wrote this. I want to be a lawyer or if not a music producer.
Oh.
How weird is that?
Yeah.
But it goes to show that kind of, it goes along with how I was designed, I guess, or created. So,
the creator put that in you, that facet. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. And my son is a music producer now, so that was interesting to see.
Yes,
so,
he is. He's a Grammy Award-winning
Grammy
producer.
Award-winning, yes.
We got to give him his kudos. Grammy
That's
Award-winning.
Right.
So
that's right.
The association has recognized
right.
him. So I heard a little bit about who you are.
Yeah.
And obviously you're sitting here across from me. So I have to ask, though. Yeah. Not specifically not the moment you made the decision for Christ, but what was life like for Lorraine growing up? What led you to that place, to where you made that decision for Christ? What was that? What was your journey like?
That's interesting. It's a long process, but I'll just kind of summarize it the best way I can. growing up, so my parents are Cuban immigrants. I had an older brother. I say had, he passed away when I was 12. But he was 10 years older than me. So when they came to this country, he was already born. My mom at that time was a Jehovah's Witness. So she knew the Lord. She always loved the Lord. She tells me a story about like when she was in her teens, how she would visit this blind elderly man in the community, and she would just read the word to him. I found that fascinating because it just showed me how like, wow, even from a young age, my own mom, loved the Lord, and then eventually she became a Jehovah's Witness, but the love for the Lord and his word was always in her. So they came to this country, and unfortunately my brother, more or less at the age of like 7 or 8, developed epilepsy. It started very, what they would call petit mal, which is he wouldn't have seizures or anything like that, but he would kind of like space out, like daydreaming, and that's how they discovered it. My mom actually discovered it while they would have dinner. She would always look at her kids and observe, and she would notice that. And he was diagnosed with that. Along his process as he got older, it turned from petit mal to grand mal, which is when now you have seizures and you fall and all these different things. And so my mom, unfortunately, experienced certain negative, if you would say, experiences from people within the Jehovah's Witness community, like people that were supposed to be believers. And just, I don't know too much of the details, but just things that surprised her and kind of disappointed her. And so she decided to leave everything altogether. She's like, I'm done with this. She had sacrificed so much with my brother because, in Jehovah's Witness, you can't celebrate birthdays, you can't celebrate holidays, you can't do any of those things. And so she felt like, what was this all for? Like, I'm done with this religion and all that stuff. And so she left it. So not too long after that, like I said, my brother was 10 years older than me. She gets pregnant with me. I'm born. And she kind of had a conversation with my father, like, listen, you decide what we're going to do. Like, I don't really care. And my family has always been Catholic. And so that's when they both decided, yeah, well, we'll be Catholics, right? But we were never, it was more like holiday.
Title.
Right. Yeah. Twice a year Catholics, right?
Title, not necessarily practicing,
correct.
observing. Okay.
Correct. So we would go on Easter and Christmas, call it a day, that kind of thing.
CEO's Christmas, Easter obligation.
Right. I love that. Oh my God. Yes. So, and because I was in private school all my life, when I was in second grade, that in the Catholic Church, to do the sacraments, they have to be in order. And so because when I was born, I wasn't baptized into the Catholic Church. Because remember, my mom was like, I don't want anything to do with religion or whatever, but I guess we have to say we're something. At 7 years old, in order for me to do my communion, I guess, I had to get baptized. So, normally when you see Catholic parents bringing in their child, it's a baby, it's an infant. Yeah. But here I am at 7 years old, like, being baptized.
The same height of the pool.
Exactly. Yeah. So I had to literally be sprinkled with water. Yeah. It was just the funniest thing. I was like, this is so retarded. I thought to myself, this is embarrassing. Like, oh my God. But I had to do it. I had to do confirmation as well, the whole sacrament thing or whatever. And so that was basically my life, Catholic school. I was raised, morals, values, all those things, but, wasn't really identified with anything in the sense of like a strong Christian or anything like that. Fast forward, my mom's best friend at the time, who had also been a Jehovah's Witness, had left that religion as well. And she used to, as a good Dominican, she would go get her hair done every weekend. Mm-hmm. And her hairdresser had just converted to Christianity. Like she had just, had a really crazy experience with the Lord, and she was in the charismatic Pentecostal movement. So her hairdresser would always preach to her, when she would get her hair done. And one day she says to her, hey, why don't you come visit my church? And again, this was my mom's best friend. Yeah. So she says, I'm going to go. So she goes and she loved it. And so now she converts. So they used to have a Bible study every Wednesday. And so what the tradition became was that every Wednesday, my mom's best friend would drop off her daughter at my house, who was my best friend. Okay. And so she could go to Bible class. Okay. And then one day, so we always looked forward to that. And then one day, my best friend's father, it was his birthday. And he goes, you know what I like on my birthday? He goes, why don't you girls come with us to the church. And my friend was like, I'm not, no, you know what I mean? Like, but I said, let's go. I'm curious. I want to go see. And so long story short, I ended up going and I was just mesmerized. Not at that occasion, it wasn't the gospel per se. It was more like the dynamic of that church culture, the music and there was nothing to what I was used to, coming out of, the Catholic, the 2 times of the year that we would go. Exactly. It was very different, not liturgical at all. And so I was just like, wow, this music is amazing. And there were a lot of youth. So that kind of caught my attention. And then I started saying, I want to go again. I want to go again. And then finally, one of the days that I went, by the way, my mom's best friend's hairdresser so happened to be my mother-in-law, which is Pastor Bernie's mom.
Your now mother-in-law.
My now mother-in-law.
Mother of your husband.
Correct. Yeah. Pastor Bernie's mom.
Yes.
And then so eventually was her church that, I started to go to and I loved it. And then that's how my mom kind of, because of her background, she saw this change in me and this desire to want to be in church. She goes, I got to check this out. And so she started coming and that, my dad came and eventually everybody started coming. But it was there that I heard Pastor Bernie's mom, my mother-in-law today, preaching the gospel. And that's when I decided to, I want to live this out. I want to accept the Lord. This sounds amazing. He did that for me. Oh my gosh. And so I, became part of the church. Like I said, my mother joined. I became, at 15, I joined the worship team. And at that time you had to be 18. But for some reason, I don't know, grace, favor, I don't know. They said, sure, come on in, join. And I joined. And then eventually became a youth leader. And, everything was great. But, unfortunately, there was a kind of a blip at that time, maybe 3 years after I came. I was 15, so by like 18, I knew the gospel. I had heard it. I had received it. I believed it. I loved the Lord. But I wasn't standing in it. And because of that, my foundation was kind of a little bit, shaky. And so when the world came with all its temptations and I was just getting out of high school and now college, got my car, independence and all this and all that, my foundation was a little shaky. And so I unfortunately allowed certain things to kind of lure me into the world and I gave in. And so I turned my back on the Lord. And for about 1.5 years, I walked outside of, his ways and the darkest times in my life. It was only 1.5 years, but it felt like 10 years.
I get that.
And not only because of the world, has nothing to offer, the consequences of things and all of that, but also I know the pain and suffering I caused my parents. It was, now that I look back on it, it was a dark time in my life,
And so, based on what you're saying, and please, I don't want to speak for you, but based on what you're saying that I'm understanding, so, you're about 7 years old, you get baptized, you're Catholics in title, not in practice. And then fast forward, your mother's friend gets connected to the faith through this hairdresser. Right. You guys and you said you're about 15 at this point?
Yes. I had just turned 15.
So you're all 15, you're about 15 and now, you're also participating and now you're attending this church service and you're hearing the gospel. Like you're actually at the very least, you're actually hearing the word and it's making some sense or it's doing something to you because like you stated, you went to mass maybe twice a year, if that, and you were significantly younger. Now, you are a youth, you're a young adult, but you're a little more mature so you can grasp a little more. Right. What I think is interesting is, similar to yourself, I was not like you. My family was Catholic, but I was born and raised in the faith. Wow. So to be you at 15, I understand what you're saying because I did every time, hey, who wants to receive Jesus? And I did, and I thought I meant it, but something wasn't, there was a disconnect.
There was,
the foundation wasn't stable. Like, it was almost as if, like, I understood religion. I understood, like, and again, this is not to say that I didn't believe in God. I knew there was God, and I knew who he was. But for me, in my immaturity and my own ignorance, I didn't walk it out. Yeah. So what I walked out was religion, doctrine. Right. It wasn't relationship. Right. So, and I get that, and I can see where the Lord uses that. So now you said, you go through that journey, that process, you hit a blip or a spike in the road where it's like, all right, things kind of come undone that year and a half. You share your heart's content, you know, what you're comfortable. But what was that like though? Because to go from, even if you hadn't necessarily made the strong connection and commitment, but to go from that lifestyle to now you're older, from the 15-year-old Lorraine to now
Yeah.
18-year-old, like, so what's that journey like in comparison? Because we know the Christianese, like, there's nothing good in the world and this, that.
Yeah.
But what was it like for you as a woman, as a young adult coming into early adulthood? Like, what was that process like,
Yeah.
having go from light into dark? What was that?
Yeah. At that time, actually, like now, of course, we look back on it and I say it was one of the darkest times of my life. However, at that time, it was great for me, right? Because what I failed to mention is that there was a lot of brokenness in me. So my family was one, meaning my nucleus, right? So my mom and my dad, they were always amazing providers, hard workers. I honor them, both. But in the busyness of world, there were a lot of things that were lacking. So I was sexually molested at 6, and it continued on for like maybe 6, 7 years old by a family member. They weren't aware. So a lot of trauma there that I really didn't realize was there. My father also, being a mom to girls now, I do realize, and now that I'm older, I realize that, there is something so special and essential and important, between a dad and a daughter, things that have to happen, conversations in place, affirmations, like things like that. Have you ever heard, I'm pretty sure you've heard of it, that they say that like a father is the first man a little girl should fall in love with, right? So, and that's obviously not in a sexual way.
No,
clearly,
I get the
but
heart
in the
behind
sense,
it.
right, the heart behind it, right? Like it's their hero, they're, oh my gosh, they're everything. And then from that relationship, you can kind of like start to say, well, this is the way it should be. So now you have a healthy stance or viewpoint of what a male role model should be in your life, right? So I never had that, right? I never had my princess, sit on my lap, let me give you advice, I never had that impartation from my father. So there was a lot of insecurities, that developed because of that. A lot of, just people pleasing because I wanted to be accepted. I never felt accepted. So I always felt that I had to prove myself. And I didn't realize then, but now I realize that it was just voids in me that existed, along with the brokenness and traumas of, the molestation and all those different things, right?
I get that.
And so because the main person in my life that should have been there was not there, which was my father. And again, not that he was a bad person, but he had 2 jobs. He was an immigrant from Cuba, hard worker, just was aloof and unaware, of certain things. And possibly his background, he didn't know how to do those things either. Him missing in the picture in that sense for me. And then also the person that molested me was also a male, figure in my life and also part of my family. Your sense of value kind of starts to wane a little bit, wane, I guess I don't matter. I guess, I don't matter. Because if I mattered and I was valuable enough, they would have never done that to me. If I mattered and was valuable enough, my father would have made the time to have the conversations with me and sit with me. So out of those things evolved a lot of emptiness and pain and suffering within my heart. So to answer your question, when I, left, and I was in the world, I say it was good for me because the world does temporarily fill, or so at least you think that it fills a lot of those things. So you find a lot of fun and independence, and you think you're becoming someone, but you're really not, right? You think that you're making a mark, but you're really not. The temporary and short-lived euphoria, of just living life and self-pleasure and gratification, all those things were good for a time. But that they're never really resolving anything within you. Only the Lord can do those things.
I get that.
So during that time, it felt great. It was okay. But then, I became pregnant. I miscarried. And then I got pregnant a second time. And then I gave birth to, that's my son, Gio. That's when something just switched inside of me, where I was after Giovanni. Okay. Yes, after I had him. Yeah. Several people, I was 19 when I got pregnant. And, I had several people tell me, like, well, you could just abort, and I said, I will never do that. I don't judge anyone that has, made that decision. Clearly, we know it's what the Bible, clearly states about, the termination of life and all of that. We don't have to get into that. And when I say I don't judge someone, I say I don't judge someone's journey and what they've been through. That was my choice at that time, that I said, no, I would never be able to do that because of the things, the morals and values that I knew were instilled in me. I had a fear of the Lord, because I knew the word at that time. And I said, no, I can't do that. It was almost like an automatic. I didn't even have to think about it. I was like, no, and also I said, this was my choice. Like, I made this choice. I'm in this now. Why am I going to, terminate his life when he had nothing to do with that? Or, I didn't know what I was having at that time. And so I knew I was also a smoker. I smoked cigarettes, and it was like cold turkey. I knew
I'm
that.
sorry, I'm having a hard time picturing that. So I'm sorry. Not
Yes,
laughing.
I know. I get it. I get it.
I have a hard time picturing Lorraine, with a Virginia Slim. I just can't.
Newport 100s, actually.
Okay,
Yep.
Wow. They had them hood cigarettes.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. It was a dark time. Yeah. So I was addicted, to, a lot. And so there was a lot of things that the Lord had to undo, from that time. And so when I became pregnant with you, it's almost like a switch happened. Like you were saying, like something like I knew, because again, I had known the Lord. I knew him. I knew his word. I was a youth leader. So even though I was operating with a lot of unresolved stuff, the word was in me. You know what I mean? The seed was there. I knew right and wrong. I knew, that I had hardened my heart to his truth and suppressed the truth, like Romans talks about. And so all that, the Holy Spirit never let me go, despite he did let me go for that season. But I knew that he really never stopped contending with me, because even throughout all that, there were a lot of things in my life that I would go through that I was like, yeah, this is not right, but oh well, kind of just keep going with it.
Hey, guilty. I've been there.
So. Yeah. So at that time, that's when I said, you know what am I doing? Like, what am I doing?
And would you say that in that clip, that moment, was that your aha moment of like, I'm committing myself to this? Like, where like you absolutely like, you reconcile with the Lord and turn the page? Or was that in itself a separate conversation or journey?
Yeah, it wasn't at that moment. I think in that moment, it was more like, what am I doing with my life? With the smoking, for example, I have to stop this. Like, I'm not going to hurt my child, like things like that. But it wasn't long after. It wasn't long after, but it wasn't immediate at that time.
No,
You know
I
what I
get
mean?
that.
But I did sense the kind of switch in that, okay, I can't continue living this way. I can't continue, like there's more here. And I believe now that it was the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit kind of like, edging me on. And actually the person that led me back to Christ was my husband, was Pastor Bernie, because he was at that time he was still in school. I believe he was in graduate school. And it was one day we were over the phone, we were talking. And I told him about these like tensions that I was feeling, like kind of feeling the Lord and I don't know, and this and that. And he says, why don't we read scripture? And so I believe we started reading Psalm 119.
Wow.
Yeah. And at the end of that, the Lord obviously, softened my heart. And he, one thing led to another. He said, do you want to recommit your life to the Lord? And I said, I do. And we did it over the phone.
That's right.
And he led me back to the Lord. Yeah.
And this is Bernie friend.
Friend.
There's nothing there other than, hey, I know
Friend.
that your mom is the pastor at that church.
Yep.
This is where we're connected, but nothing further.
Yeah. And we never lost contact.
Oh, no.
Yeah. We didn't have a lot of contact, but he would occasionally, check in. How you doing? Hey, we miss you, that kind of thing.
Okay.
A lot of other brothers and sisters in the church did that, but he was the consistent one. He was my best friend at the time before, yeah.
That's good.
It was him and his cousin Ariel. Yeah, we were three musketeers.
All right, so you make your recommitment.
Yeah.
All right, so what's life for Lorraine from that point forward?
So from that point forward, that's when I can say I started allowing the Lord to do the work that he needed to do in me, which should have happened prior. I really started living for him and not a religion.
Okay.
Like I said, I want to know you. Like, this is a do-over, and I thank you. I was also very aware that he could have allowed a lot of things to happen to me where I wouldn't be here right now. Like, I haven't gotten into depths, but when you said that, that was kind of, what did you say with the cigarettes? It was like gangster. What did you say?
Well, no, those are
kinda
hood cigarettes.
Hood cigarette.
Yeah.
Well, I was literally, at one point, I left my house and I was living in the hood. I was living in Newark in the Weequay section. So it was bad. I've been in shootouts. Like, we could sit here till tomorrow and I could have, stories of situations where I know I shouldn't be here right now, but the Lord preserved me.
In his mercy.
In his mercy.
Preserved you.
Yeah, for sure.
That's beautiful.
For sure.
So you have that moment. So you give it all. You do your confession. So from that moment forward, though, it's like where you give your life. So what's the journey like from that? Because obviously, like you said, he was then your friend.
Yeah.
Now he's your husband. So obviously something shifted.
Oh, okay. So with him,
yeah.
Yeah, no, so of course he was super excited. Everybody was. He told everybody, "Oh my God, guess who I spoke with?" And it was like Lorraine. Not to toot my own horn, but from what I experienced, everybody loved. I was a loved, figure, back in the church before I left. And again, nothing, it is what it is. You know what I mean? And plus, I was a youth leader, so I had a lot of, just a lot of people that looked up to me and stuff like that. So it was a blow. It was a blow. And I also had to deal with that after I came back to the Lord. My God, like, forgive me. First, I had to ask many people for forgiveness, many, many people. And then it was just a process. It was a journey of restoration at that point, of just getting my life back to the Lord, of just living very low, in his presence, getting back to worship, what that looked like. And I don't just mean singing, but clearly, my life.
Your life being worship unto him. Yeah.
Correct. And really just living that out. And then eventually I did go back into the worship team and all that stuff. But just everything changed for me. Everything I did just came from a different point of view, a point of view of gratitude, of just endless gratitude. My God, thank you for preserving me. Thank you for the grace and the favor to even put me back into grace, with certain people in my life, which obviously as believers, that's what should have happened, right? But at that time, you're not looking at it like that. You're just like, my God, who am I? Like, to deserve all this mercy and love, and people just welcome me and loved me back, to where I needed to be. And then, of course, friendships were restored. And among those, Bernie and I, we just started spending more time together, him and his cousin and I, and he was at Seton Hall at the time. And so we would do a lot of like trips up there and just, and one day in conversation, like it was just something that we looked at each other and it was like, I like you more than a friend type of thing,
So there was a light that something, you saw Bernie different,
Correct.
like something shifted. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And for him as well. And because remember, we've known each other since we were 15. So now we're 20, 21, 22, something like that. So
because I do my best to pay attention.
Yeah.
And my Lord, please preserve my memory. But I remember, I don't know if it was in a passing conversation or it might have been the interview, but Bernie had kind of shared like his encounter, like when he came to the Lord, and he said one of the people that he kind of went to their house and just shared everything with, and all this music, and he had like Marco Switt tapes and stuff.
Oh my God.
Was you.
Yes.
So he's like, I went and I wanted to share with her, and this is so cool. This like radical thing, because he was a good Catholic, at least his family.
Yeah.
So they got ripped out of like that whole like, the sacraments and the liturgy and all that. They're walking, like you described your encounter walking into that church at 15, when Bernie was describing like it's like, wait, that the music isn't boring. Like, wait, this is Christian music. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. And so that's why I kind of keep poking at it a little bit, because I'm just curious to know, like, all right, in proximity, Bernie's story to Lorraine, like where was that moment where it's like, okay, friends sharing the Lord, him sharing the Lord with you, with your family, so forth and so on, where do they connect? Where's the part where it's like, okay, and then intersect and grow in ministry and friendship in the Lord, and what that looks like.
Yeah. And one of the things I think that, speaking of the friendship, I think that one of the things, and I can speak on Bernie's behalf because he's actually said it before, is that one of the things that he always says that attracted me to him is that I always kept it real with him. So, like, for example, during those time when he was young, imagine Bernie has, had and has, amazing charisma, for
yeah.
preaching and all these different things. And so because he was so young, you know how it is, especially in the Hispanic culture, like, they start looking at him like they start almost like, oh, putting him on this little pedestal and
propping
like,
him up.
all right. So he was kind of, drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit,
He was
Believe
feeling
it.
himself.
He was feeling himself. He was very, I would even say at some points like a little self-righteous, with certain things. And I would always like knock him off the horse, man. I was always like, really? Like, who do you think you are?
You were his reality check.
I was his reality check, yes. And he says he always loved that. That he, in his words, he always says that I never treated him like everybody else did. I always just treated him like a normal person, like just Bernie. You know what I mean? And I would call him out on stuff. I would call him out, be like, and even in prayer sometimes we would have like these vigils. Remember the vigilias? I would just
we'll go back to that one in a minute. We'll go back to that one because
Yeah.
I actually have an adolescent story for you
Okay.
from one of those.
Okay.
But you finish yours, but I did want, there's something
Yeah.
I've been holding on. I've been sitting on this one for a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's nothing crazy. I was just like, people would, we'd be in those moments of like intense prayer and like, the lights off and everybody's like speaking in tongues and everything. And it was just glorious. And then we'd have a moment where, we'd be praying for each other. And then here I'd come and I'd be talking to Bernie like, Lord, just meet him in that place of pride. And he was like, what? Like, he was like, but she's right. So like little things like that nobody would ever dare pray like that over him. You know what I mean? Or for him. So, yeah.
I remember you, because I'm that guy you call that, like on a game show that holds on to useless information. And I want to say I had to have been maybe 15.
Yeah.
Funny enough, one of the very things you're describing, I was participating in. It was a vigil at the ministry where you guys were at.
And in our church?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And
what?
Yeah.
What year was this?
Yeah, no, this is some time ago. This is
So we've
I was
crossed paths then.
No, absolutely. You.
Oh my goodness.
We did like a lock-in. It was a vigil.
Yeah.
And you had a class, and we went downstairs, and I remember I said something.
No way.
And I said something in the class, and you laughed.
I did?
Yeah.
Oh
and
my goodness.
You laughed, and you said, "What's your name?" I said, because I was nervous. I was like,
Oh
"Damn,
my
I'm
God,
gonna get in
Marcos.
trouble."
I had no idea.
I said, "Yeah, Marcos." He's like, "Oh, Marcos, you're a funny guy." And then you kept it going.
That is hysterical.
But that was like a full circle moment, like I said, because I told Bernie in his interview, I said, I knew you when you had hair. I was like, you and I used to share the same barber. So I knew you when you had hair.
What a small world.
Because of the ministry I went to. I was in Jesus Lord, so we did a lot of
Things
those
together,
crossover.
yeah.
So it was a specific vigil that I remember being at the camp at, and I remember that encounter, and I'll never forget it. So then, years later, paths cross again, and I'm like, okay, like, because again, it's not to say that we're the best of friends or whatever, but I have working knowledge of who you guys were and what have you. So that's why to me, I'm just like, wow, it's like, God.
See, these are the things that fascinate me.
Yeah.
You see that detail that we crossed paths before, like who would have known?
Yeah.
Wow, incredible.
So you have this, back to the interview.
Yeah.
you have this moment, so you're walking this life out, as it were.
Yeah.
You're growing in the faith, and clearly you're growing in getting to know this other individual.
Yeah.
So what's that like?
With Bernie?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Bernie, but in Lorraine's aspect too. Like, I want, like, what you as woman, like, what was that like? Because now I don't know how old Gio is at this point.
Yeah.
So what does that look like for you as you continue to walk out this life in Christ? Again, recommitting, being involved, so forth.
Right. Well, I have to say that Bernie, when I said before that I would ask the Lord, like, man, who am I to deserve so much? Bernie was actually one of those things. And I say things, even though he's a person, because I felt that he was a gift for me, from the Lord. Like I said, my God. So he obviously was in my life. He saw me pregnant. When Gio was born, he came to visit. Again, we were friends at that time. And he saw him, and great. And then when things finally, fast forward, that we just looked at each other. I was like, wow, like, I feel comfortable with you. I know you. So when it happened, it was like a natural thing. It wasn't even like, oh, I have to get to know you, because I already knew him. He already knew me. You know, we were best of friends. And so it was very natural. And then with Gio, I think that it was a little rough in the beginning with his family, which I understand, because they, you know, they didn't want that for him. Not the sense that I had a child, but also like, is this child's biological father in the picture? Who is he? Is he going to cause problems? Is he going to be a problem? You know, and it turns out that he wasn't in his life, you know, unfortunately for Gio. You know, he suffered a lot of things because of that. And even to this day, like just a lot of abandonment issues and a lot of, you know, things that, you know, he struggled with. But it was kind of a good thing for us in the sense that Bernie was able to be that male person in his life, aside, in addition to my father. Because when Bernie and I got married, Gio was 5. So Gio, I lived with my parents and Gio, you know, in my parents' house till he was 5 years old. So my father really was that primary male role model figure for my son's life. But since Bernie and I were dating and he, you know, would come over, Gio also knew Bernie, you know what I mean? So he wasn't like this stranger. And finally, when, you know, he proposes and we, you know, get married, Bernie's kind of stance with that was, well, I'm never going to force anything on him. He can call me Bernie, because that's what Gio would always call him, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. And then one day it came out of Gio on his own. I will never forget. I think we were at his mom's house, my mother-in-law's house. And Gio just came out and said to him, can I call you daddy or dad? Something like that. And Bernie was like, oh my God, like he got so emotional. And he was like, of course you can. So that was a very natural thing. But for me as a woman, like, of course, I just felt like, Lord, this is a gift. You know, what better person than Bernie, you know, to not only be my husband, right, and to walk this out with me, who's my best friend, confidant, knows everything about me. You know what I mean? It's not like I have to share with him all these things. He knows everything about. He saw my whole process, my whole journey. He led me back to the Lord. You know what I mean? And then also my son is here, needs a father. What better person than him, you know, to be that person, to be a father to him. I was just in awe of God's favor and mercy over my life and blessing.
Not that it's, you know, identical, but it's interesting as you're unpacking your story. Like I'm sitting here listening, and it seems I can connect it to like Ruth, the book of Ruth, where it's like the redemption, where it's
That's
like,
good.
you know, you had your hiccup, you had your issue, you know, you're human, and that's I actually, and it's not to say that I'm trying to pry purposely, but what the reason I keep asking in such a way is because it's exposing the humanity, and it's like, hey guys, this is not a one size fits all. This is not a glove. You know, everybody's story and journey is different. And like you had the encounter at 15, something led you astray, but the Lord absolutely used it. Yeah, you made a mistake and you live with them, but He doesn't lord that over your head. And in that, He draws you back to Him. He invites you back into the family. A community does come around you. A friend who's now your husband. Like, I say it all the time. We play checkers and God's playing chess, because He's like, hey, Lorraine, it doesn't end here. Like, there's this whole other dynamic that I'm going to introduce to you. And to see God's faithfulness in your life through that process. And you're not glorifying your sin, but you're also not pretending like it didn't happen.
That's my story. Right, exactly.
So I can appreciate that. I respect it all the more, because that whole thing of like, oh, I came to Jesus and then.
Right.
And it's like, all
right. Let's keep it real.
Noise.
Come on.
Cut the noise. So
I agree. 100%.
I can appreciate that and that respect, and the even like you stated, even the redemption for Gio, in the respect of like, hey, someone else dropped the ball, but this man said, no, I'll pick it up and I'll run with it, and that's beautiful, because I'm living proof. Like my mom, she remarried. My father, to me, I was just a paycheck, meaning like I would, you know, Monday through Friday, I was lower middle class, Saturday, Sunday, upper middle class. You know what I
Wow.
mean?
Yeah.
But all I was here's your child support. There was no relationship
Yeah.
similar to you, not in the daddy daughter dynamic,
Yeah.
but similar in the respect of like I can, and it's sad, so you know,
Yeah.
try not to, but I can count on one hand how many times my father actually gave me a hug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get that. I
Yeah.
get the importance of needing that father figure, of having that voice that will speak into
Right.
you know our struggles, or you know where we may be at in a specific part of our life or what have you. I
Right.
see the importance of that. So the fact that not only did the Lord just redeem you in that episode,
Right.
but He also gave your son a lifeline.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this individual said, no, I welcome that. And
Yeah.
I've seen it walked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
I've seen it walked out because that's one of the things that I always look to. It's not that I never covet, but I like to observe other fathers and their relationship with their kids and how they handle things.
Yeah.
Not as a critique that I'm like, well, I wouldn't done this. This is
Right,
just
right.
observation,
Yeah.
sociologically, like
Yes.
just observing, like,
Right.
okay. And I see Bernie's interaction with you. I see his interaction with his daughters.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful,
Yeah.
but it literally is a demonstration. It's a snapshot of the Father, our Father,
Yeah.
heart for us.
Yeah.
So I think that's beautiful. And I can see where the Lord has ultimately restored, and He just continues to move in your life, the life of your children, in your obviously your husband's life. So it is beautiful.
And in that season, just to add to what you're saying, like in that season, since you had asked me like what was that process for me like after, you know, I got to see God the Father in a different role as God the Father, but reconciler, restorer for my life anyway. You know what I mean? Because I had always known him as, of course, a loving father. You know, what he did for us, you know, send his only son. Great. Yeah. You know, meaning that's how I was looking at it back then. Like, wow, this is amazing. But having lived through all that blip that we were talking about, and then coming back and experiencing now this other facet of him, this other, you know, attribute of him that he's merciful. No, now I know what mercy is. I've lived it. You know, I know that he reconciles. He's in the business of reconciliation because I lived that. I mean, he's in the business of restoration. I lived that. You know what I mean? So it's not now like I just know that about him, but I lived that, which is, I will tell you, Marcos, which is why I worship the way I do. Well, what do I mean by that? Meaning my expression. Like sometimes there's times that I'm on that platform and I want to just run. I want to just run. You know, I want to like, I'm like, I feel too confined in here because I'm just so grateful. And I've always been, since that moment on, that's how I've always, I don't know. It's just like something in me that's like wants to burst when I think of his goodness and just his mercy over my life. That is just something that I just want to, I don't know what to do with myself.
And I get that because in that he's the one who's like your cup is running over.
Yeah.
Because even when you think you're like, he's like, nope, double dose. We fills you right back up.
Yeah.
And then to see the overflow in not only your personal life, but in your family's life. And you know, even when your mom has shown up at service, like I see the tenderness and the dynamic between you two as someone who just, not that she was my mom, but in essence she was, you know, just put my grandma to rest or whatever. I get that dynamic, and, you know, similar background, hardworking Cuban woman. Yeah. But that woman loved the Lord. She would never not be thankful to God. Just popping a mint in her mouth. Gracias a Dios.
Yeah.
Like that's who she was, because it was in her. So to see that the faithfulness of God in her life and her faithfulness to him, to see it in another family, similar, you know, Cuban background, so forth and so on. I think it's a beautiful thing. And it's refreshing.
Yeah.
It is. And I got to ask you though, so at this point, what keeps you going in the faith though? Because you had the experiences you had.
Right.
and you encountered the things you had and so forth and so on. The Lord's done a mighty work. I mean, you're a worshiper, you're creative. I mean, you've recorded an album. You've done a lot, Lorraine. So, but what keeps you going though? What keeps you going in the Lord? What keeps you waking up every morning like, you know what? I'm going to pick up my cross and follow him. What keeps you going?
Yeah, I would say, and before I answer that, I do, because it just came to my mind right now that you mentioned your grandmother. And I want to just add something because it made me think of my mother. I know that also part of the reason why the Lord preserved and did what he did was there was a praying mother. My mom was on her knees. My mom never gave up, no matter what she saw, no matter what she felt, And so if anybody's hearing this right now that has a child or a teenager or whatever that's going through something like that, my encouragement to you is keep the faith, keep praying, keep believing, declaring over that child's life that they are, even the person you don't see that they're being, just keep declaring because the Lord is faithful. And so that leads me to your question. What keeps me going is exactly that, God's faithfulness. And it's actually 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 and 9. And I'll paraphrase it, and it's where he says, he will keep you firm until the end, blameless on the day of the Lord, right? And in verse 9, it says, God is faithful. So that's the reason why, because he's faithful, he's going to keep us. Because, like, for example, I would have answered this question, oh, what keeps me going is, I just think about how good he's been. And even my own testimony, right? I could say, well, I just think about what he's done. And even though those are all good things, right? It's emotional, right? Yeah. We can think about Good Friday is a good example. We saw the Passion. I was like born again that day. Man, what I was feeling for those 2 weeks after that, I was like, wow. But now a month, 2 months later, whatever, that kind of way, it goes away a little bit, right? And so now you have to like consistently remind yourself, right? I have to get in the Word. I got to pray. I got to meditate on Scripture. All good things, and we have to do them, right? But in the end, I think what keeps me is the realization that even though if I do all those things, which are good to do, reading my Word, staying in prayer, staying connected, all that, what's keeping me is his faithfulness. Because it's his faithfulness to continue to make me into the person that I'm supposed to be, right? The person that he wants to see me as, right? So that until the end, I can present myself before him blameless. We're justified, believing in Jesus Christ. Our status before God is justified. We're guiltless, right? But sometimes our actions don't match that.
They get
right?
that.
They don't. And it's because we're human. We make mistakes, and that's why we fall and get back up again, fall and get back up again. So in those moments, what keeps me going is obviously, yes, his love. His love is constantly seducing me back, but the heart is deceitful sometimes too, right? Because we can think of all these things. We're so ungrateful kind of sometimes, just like the Israelites were in the desert. What did they not see in the desert? They saw manna falling from the sky, and yet they still turned their backs on him, right? And so that's us sometimes too. So even though, yes, these are good things, and I would even say in certain seasons, yeah, they've kept me, but really what has kept me is his faithfulness. And every time I think about that, that pushes me to keep going and go further, because I didn't deserve any of this. Even on my best day, I'm not worthy and I fall short. So it's his faithfulness that keeps me going.
No, that's good. So as we wrap up, I have one question, and everybody, has a different response. So,
Yeah.
You respond how you see fit.
Yeah.
You could look at me, or you could look at that camera over there. But I have to ask you then, if there's something you could say to your former self, or someone who may be going through some of the things you did, or worse, or what have you, it could be a statement, phrase. What would you say?
Yeah. I would say if I could look back and see myself, right? Or someone that's going through something like what I went through, or my younger self, whatever, I would say you're going to go through some stuff, but none of those things define you. Who the Lord says you are defines you. That's your identity. Keep pressing forward and know that all these things are just going to make you the person that the Lord wants you to become if you stand firm in him. That's what I would say. don't be afraid of the things that'll happen to you. Don't be afraid. Don't get frustrated. You know, life happens. But in him, there's redemption. So just trust the process and know that all these things are being used to make you into the person that he wants you to be. Trust him. That's what I would say.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
No,
this was fun.
It was fun. It was fun.
I wish you could keep talking.
No, it was real fun, and thank you for that. And the reality is, you know, that answer, your response, it's what the Lord led you to share, and there's no wrong answer. It's you know, so thank you so much for that, and bless you, and hopefully we'll get to chat again some other time.
Absolutely. Thank you for doing this, Marcus. You're amazing.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for watching that episode. We pray that it blessed you. If you enjoyed that episode, please feel free to check back every month where we'll have a new story and a new guest. Until next time, God bless.